500 loggers deep. Thank you. What started as a whisper in the dark has now grown to 500 shadows walking beside me. To every single logger out there, thank you for tuning in, watching, commenting, and following this eerie journey into the unknown. Every sub, every view, every late night watch session fuels this channel deeper into the void. The 500 subscriber special is currently in production, and trust me, it's going to be something you won't forget. I'm writing this because the official report leaves too much out, and the recordings don't make sense unless you know what I was thinking when I heard them. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would have believed me either before the night of November 18th, 19 degrees, dry, and a wind that came in hard from the east, shoving the sound of the highway up against the hills like a wall. I work nights for roadside assistance in our county, mostly jump starts, lockouts, the occasional tire on the shoulder with a driver too rattled to risk the jack. We cover the stretch of State 41 that cuts between quarry land and the old rail yard. The quarry stopped blasting years ago, but they never took down the sound barrier. 20-foot poured concrete panels that turn any noise into something strange and flat. If you clap out there, it comes back a second later like a different person. Everything started with a call I didn't take. Dispatch flagged it at 0014. Female voice, barely audible, dropped after 8 seconds. The callback rang to voicemail. The CAD notes were bland. Possible stranded vehicle near MM212. Wind noise, unreadable. I was already westbound from a dead battery at the truck stop, so I told dispatch I'd sweep past 212 before I clocked out. If you've never driven that section at night, it's just black. No overheads, just your own beams flaring off the panels. Mile 210 came easy, then 211 like a tongue in your mouth. Then that long, gentle downgrade where the rumble strip sounds like someone dragging a rake behind you. I slowed to 40 and killed my high beams to get rid of my own glare. If there's a car with hazards running, it shows up quicker that way. I saw the triangles first, 3 of them laid out perfect in the right shoulder, 30 paces back from where a vehicle ought to be, 3 paces off the fog line. All the reflective faces angled the way manuals teach. They looked fresh, clean plastic, not sun-chalked, except there was no car. Past the triangles, empty shoulder, barrier, a scattering of damp gravel against the base of the concrete. No skid marks, no glass. The kind of nothing that feels loud. I pulled in behind the triangles with my amber bar on steady, parked half on the shoulder, half in the lane to box out traffic. I keyed up. 210-3 on scene near 212, possible disable. I've got triangles. No vehicle. I let go and listened for dispatch. Static. Then a half second of my own voice like a bad playback. 212, possible disable. I've got it cut off. I tapped the mic again. The squelch cracked in my ear. This happens sometimes. Mountains make echoes. I leaned into the wind and walked the shoulder with my light. There was a smell that wasn't exhaust or hot brakes. Something like winter breath and old copper, not strong enough to call blood, not sweet enough to call decay. My beam swept the barrier and every seam in the panels. People stash pets there sometimes, or kids hide coins in the vertical joints. I saw a handprint at shoulder height, 5 rays in a crescent smear, as if the hand slid sideways and down before it lifted. Not greasy like you'd expect. Dry. Frost had filmed over the concrete. Where the hand was, the frost had melted and refrozen, making a halo that caught my light and kicked it back white. I walked 40 yards in both directions. Nothing. On my way back, I counted the triangles. 1, 2, 3, and a 4th nested between the 2nd and 3rd, like someone had started to pack up and then change their mind. I crouched to check the manufacturer stamp. It was the same brand as the other 3. Same dust in the creases. But the hinge had a nick. Red paint, bright despite the dark. Dispatch, you copy? The triangles are weird out here. I'm going to check the median. My radio hissed like someone exhaling. A voice, mine again, whispered, "Don't." Then the channel popped clean with our night dispatcher, Max, telling me to clear if there's no hazard. His words were too loud, like he'd leaned into his mic. I crossed the lane during a gap in traffic and clambered over the cable barrier into the median. The wind was worse there. You can feel the cars before you hear them. The pressure pushing you back half a step. There were footprints in the flattened weeds, not fresh, but newer than the last rain. A small set, maybe a woman's, a narrow heel, a chip out of the outer edge, and a larger set that loved the center of the foot, like the person was heavy or walked with their toes trying to find the ground. They moved in parallel until they didn't. The smaller ones turned toward the barrier, then crossed it mid-sag, then vanished, as if the person had stepped into the concrete itself. My light hit a gap I swear wasn't there when I drove up. A joint where 2 panels didn't meet flush. You can slip your fingers in if you're stubborn and forget you're somewhere a car could shear you in half for standing dumb. The gap breathed. That's not a metaphor. Cold spilled through it in pulses that made the hair on my knuckles lift. On the next pulse, the smell came stronger, and under the wind and the throb of tires there was a small sound like paper being turned. I stuck my phone into the gap and hit record on the flashlight app, a trick I use when I need a second angle and no extra hands. I counted 15 Mississippis and yanked it out. The video was short, a triangle of light swallowing frost, then a tear on the edge of the frame like a clear drop crawling upward. The LED fought with the darkness until the focus caught a corner of something curved and white. Ceramic, I thought at first, but it had pores, tooth, molar, the kind kids lose. That felt stupid. Teeth don't sit behind highway panels. They belong in mouths. And the wind is not a thing that tastes like copper and reads you back your own words. Max called me on the voice channel to ask if I'd cleared. He sounded routine, bored. I said, "Negative. I'm finding," and my own voice overlapped mine again, millisecond off. "Negative. I'm finding." Like the road itself was with me, repeating me, the kind of thing that knocks the calm out of you without boiling you. It makes your hands careful. I slid the phone into my pocket, braced my back against the barrier, and pried the gap a 1/4 inch wider with my crowbar. Crowbars were not designed for whatever the barrier panels are made from. The bar sang, a fat metallic note that made the fillings in my teeth hum. The gap went from 1/8 to 1/4 to 1/2 inch, and the cold that came through was not night cold. It was basement cold, the kind of cold that has a floor to it, a lowest step. The paper turning noise repeated closer, and then the crowbar slipped and kissed my glove. I swore, and my radio swore with me, my voice a ghost behind mine. The gap snapped back, pinched the tip of my glove, and left a line of frost like a seam of quartz. I backed away. Something in me, that idiot or animal that consults the oldest parts of your brain, wanted both to get my face up in that gap and also to lie down and let the dark fold me like a sheet. That's the only way I can say it. It wanted it like thirst wants water, not just desire, but a rule in the body. I was too awake to do either, so I did the thing I know how to do. I took inventory. On the shoulder, 4 triangles. In the median, 2 kinds of prints going one way, one kind ending at a wall. In the wall, a gap that breathed. In the gap, something with the hardness and shape of a small tooth. In my ear, my own voice delaying and playing back. In my pocket, a video that would make no sense to anyone who hadn't heard the paper sound coming from behind the concrete. The wind broke for a moment, and through the hush I heard a woman say distinctly, "I can't get it open." She said it like you say it to yourself when the lid is stuck. A voice in a kitchen, low and almost embarrassed. It didn't come from the barrier. It came from the lane, from my truck. I walked back, ready to knock on my own cab window with the butt of the light like an idiot, but the cab was empty. The driver's door was shut. The dash cam status light blinked green. On the center console sat a child's tooth in a Ziploc bag. Black Sharpie had written, "For luck." I don't carry Ziplocs in the cab. I don't carry Sharpies. I don't carry teeth. Max said my call sign like I'd been ignoring him. 2103, status. I told him I had an abandoned safety deployment and would be clearing the triangles so no one hit them. He told me to do that and head in. On the tail end, I heard my own voice reply something I hadn't said. "I'll get it open." There was no sarcasm in it, no fear, just certainty, like I'd promised someone where I could be believed. I told myself a thing you have to tell yourself to keep working nights. If someone is messing with you, it is a person, and you can handle a person. I kicked the legs of the first triangle and folded it flat. When I reached for the second, the hinge with the red nick, the wind came sideways and the triangle stood up as if gripped and placed. I am not saying it moved on its own. I am saying it was down and then it was up, and there was no time between the two states for me to explain how. The dash cam caught some of this, but only in the way dash cams catch anything. They compress the bad into something plausible. Later, when the detective paused the footage and asked me, "Is that you right there?" pointing at the shape in the median, I said yes because I was wearing my jacket and the camera doesn't know what the wind grows under concrete. I put the triangles back in my truck. I drove to the next turnaround and came back slow in the eastbound lane to look at the opposite shoulder. I didn't want to, and I did it anyway. If you do the job, you do the job. Eastbound, there's a shallow drainage dip between the panel base and the grass. My light found a smear like someone had sat down hard and slid. 2 parallel furrows 2 feet apart, the spacing you get when a bumper's plastic skid leaves tracks. a third furrow between them narrower than either, a tailpipe drag. I parked, hazard bar steady, and went down the bank. The dirt there is the fine gray stuff that sticks to everything, the kind you taste later, uninvited. I bent to touch the furrows and felt heat under the soil, like something had passed a minute before. When I put my palm flat, the heat pulsed. It didn't fade like a cooling thing. It beat like a living thing. The woman's voice came again, closer and thin. I can't get it open. It won't open. The voice was wrong in a way the ear knows before the brain. It had no size, no place. It was small and enormous at once, like the bridge of a song played on a toy piano in a cathedral. I said out loud, to nothing I could point to, "What?" Because that's what your mouth does when your brain needs another second. The wind shut off. Somewhere behind the panel there was a sound like a latch turning to meet a tongue, metal to metal, old and polite. I got to my feet and put my hand against the concrete. It was warm under my glove. Not the broad warmth of sun. A coin-size warmth like a fingertip on the other side pressed where mine pressed. "Dispatch," I said, and my voice on the channel sounded like a man who has not breathed right in a minute. "I need a unit to 212. We may have a person in the barrier. Possible stuck door. Possible structural." I couldn't say gap that breathes. I couldn't say tooth in my truck. Max read me back. 212 sending county. 15 minutes. My own voice threaded his by a breath. 15 minutes. I stood there with my palm on the panel like a person praying to a god he doesn't admit to. The warmth on the other side pressed back. The paper turning sound resumed, slower now. If you have ever listened to pages being turned by a kid learning to read, too hard, one at a time, a breath between. Imagine that enclosed in cement. Imagine that without air. An eastbound semi took the lane closest to me. The pressure slapped my jacket against my back and rattled the light in my teeth. When the roar passed, the paper sound had stopped. In the second after it, hollow and weird, I heard the muffled sound you make when you try not to cry and fail. Then, footsteps, not on the shoulder, not on dirt, on something resonant and hollow, like sheet metal or a car roof. 5 steps, a pause, 2 more, then a scrape, then a soft thud, then nothing. I told myself I was hearing my own memory. There was no place for footsteps behind concrete. Then there was the squeak of a hinge, not new, not oiled, the sound of metal beating its own rust to obey. The warm coin under my hand cooled as if someone had taken their hand away. I pressed harder. Nothing pressed back. County arrived fast because they were close when the call went out. 2 deputies with vests unzipped and the ambulance a minute behind. I nodded them to the panel like I was the one who belonged there. Deputy Kincaid put his ear to the concrete. He listened a full 10 seconds, then said, "Hell," not about anything in particular. He had a way of saying it like a man who's seen the shape of a problem but not its face. They scanned the length of the barrier with the thermal camera from the truck. The screen showed our bodies cold green and the panel blank. Then, halfway between the triangles and the median, a rectangle bloomed warmer than the concrete around it, hinged on the right, exactly the size and shape of a door a person could fit if they turned a shoulder. There aren't doors in sound walls. There aren't. Kincaid thumped the panel with the butt of his flashlight. It gave back a noise that was not concrete. It sounded like the back of an old refrigerator. The EMT asked if anyone had opened a service access like that before. Kincaid said he'd never seen a service anything on 41. The other deputy ran his hand over the seam with the thermal. The rectangle cooled while he watched. Within 30 seconds, it was the same color as the rest. We stood in a half circle around the place where the heat had been. No one spoke. The highway moved past us like a river, pretending it wasn't a throat. I don't know who moved first. I only remember I was on my knees before the panel with the crowbar again, like a man repeating a mistake because the mistake is the only certain thing he owns. Kincaid told me to wait up and got the wedge head under the seam where my glove had frozen. When he pried, the metal sang again, lower and longer, and my radio chirped, and my own voice whispered in my ear, gentle and tired, "There you go." The seam opened the width of 2 fingers. The coin cold came out like breath. The paper sound began again, quicker. Then it wasn't paper, it was plastic on cloth. Then it was a zipper, small teeth, fighting fabric. Kincaid pulled harder. Something inside tugged back. Not against Kincaid, against us. Like hands from the other side were trying to help. The gap opened to a hand's width and showed an inside surface that wasn't poured anything, but painted steel. Olive drab. A shadow moved beyond it. I said, "Hello?" And whatever was in there stopped moving like a deer hearing the thing it feared confirm itself. "Ma'am?" Kincaid called. He doesn't say ma'am like a kid from TV. He says it like a man who has said it to sobbing people at 3 in the morning and meant nothing but help. "We're here. We've got you. I'm going to open it." On the other side, a woman said, calm and close, "Please don't." And a child said, smaller than your heart can bear, "He's still there." Kincaid met my eyes over the bar. He could have been asking me nothing at all or everything. The wind lifted and presses our jackets against us again. The little voice, no bigger than your thumb, said out of the seam, "He's behind." I bent and put my face to the crack and saw nothing but black. The thermal showed nothing. Heat bleeds away behind steel faster than you think. But the smell came again, copper and winter breath. And behind that, something sweet and just beginning to rot, like fruit a week past good. The paper sound stopped. The zipper sound resumed. Soft, slow. "Don't open it," the woman said. Calm. Incredible. "Please, please wait." Kincaid is not a man who waits with kids behind panels. He set his jaw and leaned into the bar. The seam shivered. The wind dropped. The highway held its breath. From inside, a metal tongue kissed a latch, disengaged, and set itself again. And then, this is the part where I don't expect even generous people to follow me. The concrete bowed, not the steel door, the concrete around it. It bent outward a half inch like something behind it had pressed its back into the panel and pushed. Every triangle reflector on my tailgate flashed the same red at the same instant. My radio popped. The ambulance's inverter clicked and spun for no reason the EMT could later find. And all of us, me, Kincaid, the other deputy, and the EMT, heard a man's voice from nowhere and everywhere say, pleased as someone opening their own front door, "I got it. The panel gave. The seam jumped. Kincaid pitched forward. The bar clanged onto the shoulder. Cold rolled over us like tide. I can tell you the smell. I can tell you the sound of the zipper closing. I can show you the dash cam of us staggering to stand. I cannot tell you what I saw in the black past that door, except there was a space that should not be between two structures that were not built to hold space. That was when the wind returned, and with it the whine of an eastbound car whose driver never saw us until the last second. Horn, brakes, the ugly howl of rubber. We scattered. In the confusion, the seam slammed shut with the tidy click of a latch that knew its work. When we went at it again, we couldn't get the bar back in. The EMT said softly, "Not to anyone. There are fingerprints." She shone her penlight on the concrete. The frost had melted in 5 perfect ovals, small ones below at child height, larger ones high. A third set overlapped the larger, not larger or smaller so much as deeper, set into the concrete's face as though long fingers had rested there a very long time. County taped the scene and called it in. The report says, "No vehicle located, no hazard found." It notes my video as inconclusive. It marks the door as apparent utility access, which is what you call a thing that can't be what it is. I signed my name. I went home. In the morning, this will matter later, I found the Ziploc on my counter, not the one from my truck. A second one with a second small tooth inside. Blue Sharpie this time. "For luck," it said again. But the handwriting had changed. That was the first night. It wasn't the worst. The morning after the barrier incident, I woke with my radio still on the nightstand. Volume turned low, just static whispering through it. My house was quiet, but the kind of quiet that feels full, like the air itself is holding its breath. For a while I lay there trying to believe the simplest version of things, that exhaustion and adrenaline had built a hallucination out of wind and headlights. Then the smell hit me. The faint, sweet metal scent that had been coming from the gap in the wall. It was coming from the kitchen. The second Ziploc bag sat on the counter exactly where I'd left it. Only it wasn't sealed anymore. The top was open. The blue line of the zipper split clean. Inside, the tooth was gone. There was a ring of moisture around the bag, circular, as if something cold and round had been set there long enough to melt frost. The counter felt warm under my hand, like the heat had sunk into the laminate. I told myself I'd throw the whole thing away after I filed the report. But part of me, the part that still believed in procedure, in cause and effect, needed to know how something could make it from the highway to my kitchen. At headquarters, the duty sergeant met me with the look people give when they've heard gossip before evidence. "County sent over your report," he said. "You okay?" I said I was fine. He said, "Good, because there's a follow-up out there." A guy from Public Works found something near the same panel you flagged. They had cordoned the spot with fresh cones. The frost on the concrete was already gone. The sun had turned everything to damp gray. Kincaid was there, pale and tired, smoking too much for a man with a badge that visible. He didn't say hello, just handed me a coffee. "They scraped the shoulder for debris," he said. "Found this wedged in the seam." It was another reflective triangle. Same make, same bright hinge. But the red nick on the hinge was deeper now, cut into metal instead of paint. Something had pressed on it hard enough to leave an imprint shaped like a fingertip. And the metal around the print was cold. Not weather cold. Cold. Kincaid saw me touch it and said, "Thermal showed nothing last night. We checked again this morning, and that panel is still reading colder than the rest." He flicked ash toward the barrier. "Steel core maybe? Or there's a cavity behind it." I said, "Utility access?" He shook his head. "We ran the blueprints. There's no access there. That panel isn't supposed to exist." The maintenance map of Highway 41 was old, color-coded. Where our incident was marked, the line jumped from 211.8 to 212.4, skipping everything in between. A clerical error maybe, but the scale of the jump didn't match the road's geometry. It was as if a piece of the highway had been lifted out of the record entirely. Public Works drilled a small hole near the seam to test the density. When the bit broke through, a burst of air escaped, white vapor rolling out like breath. Everyone stepped back. The vapor smelled like cold copper and wet paper. The foreman crouched, looked through the hole with a flashlight. He said, "It's hollow, maybe 6 feet deep. There's a surface inside. Looks like painted metal and something else." He hesitated. "It's moving." Kincaid grabbed the light. The beam shook. "Not moving," he said finally. "Flickering." The foreman sealed the hole with tape, muttering about liability. He told us to call environmental if the smell got worse. By the time he left, the tape had already frosted over from the inside. I stayed until the others packed up. The highway noise was constant, hypnotic. When Kincaid pulled away, the wind shifted east again, and for a moment the tape lifted and fluttered, making that same papery sound from the night before. Back home, I dumped my dash cam card into the computer, thinking I'd watch the footage once and then delete it. The video ran normally until the frame where Kincaid pried the panel. Then the feed stuttered. The timestamp froze, and the audio turned into a low rhythmic hum. Every fifth frame showed something the others didn't. A faint outline of a woman's face in the concrete, her mouth open as if whispering. The next frame would erase her completely. When the feed finally ended, the screen stayed black for 5 full seconds. Then a new clip began, time-stamped 6 hours after we'd left the scene. The lens pointed at the median from the same angle, but the truck wasn't there. The audio captured only one thing: footsteps moving slowly from left to right, pausing, then a small voice saying, "It opened again." I unplugged the drive, buried it in the toolbox behind the water heater. You learn not to destroy evidence, but you also learn not to keep things that listen. That night, around 2 a.m, the radio in my bedroom turned on by itself. No static this time, just silence on an open channel. Then, faintly, paper turning, zipper closing, and a man's voice that matched mine perfectly. 15 minutes. The department scheduled me for counseling the next day. The counselor's office had those cheap diffusers that make everything smell like citrus. Halfway through the session, I noticed a Ziploc bag on her desk, paper clipped to a report. Inside was a small white shape. She saw me looking. "Evidence from your incident," she said casually. "I was asked to keep it until chain of custody confirms." I said, "That's a tooth." She smiled the way therapists do when they think they're steering you back to logic. "Maybe," she said, "but it's not human. Dental enamel, yes, but the core isn't organic." "What's it made of?" "Concrete," she said. "Someone molded it." The air vent clicked on, pushing a cold draft across the room. It smelled faintly like sugar turning on a stove. The counselor's pen rolled off the desk and hit the floor with a tiny, perfect chime. I bent to pick it up, and when I straightened, the bag with the tooth was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every surface in the house seemed to hum at a different frequency. The fridge, the baseboards, even the glass in the window panes. Around midnight, the humming synced into a single note. Low, steady, almost musical. Outside, the wind had stopped. The frost on my front step began to melt in one perfect handprint. I could smell copper and paper, and from somewhere very close, a woman's voice whispered through the dark, as soft as breath on glass. "He's still there." The department closed the case 3 days later. Official line, false call, no vehicle located, no fatalities recorded. Unofficially, nobody wanted to touch it anymore. The file went into cold storage under infrastructure irregularities. Kincaid stopped returning my calls. Public Works plastered the panel and marked it "Structural evaluation pending." Every night since, I'd wake at exactly 12:08 a.m., the minute after midnight from the original call, and hear faint tapping from somewhere in the walls. The pattern was always the same. 3 slow, 2 fast. Like the triangles, like someone asking permission to come through. I stopped logging the sounds after the first week because writing them down only made them real. Still, I checked the wall temperature each morning. It stayed a constant 41 degrees Fahrenheit, even when the rest of the house warmed with the sun. 2 weeks after the incident, a package arrived at the precinct, unmarked, addressed simply to 210-3. Inside was a flash drive and a single Polaroid. The photo showed the highway barrier. Fresh snow, no traffic. In the foreground, the outline of a car door pressed outward from the concrete, as if something underneath had tried to open it. A woman's handprint marked the window shape. The back of the photo said only, "He's almost through." The flash drive held one video file. The timestamp read 0014, the same time as the original distress call. It showed dashcam footage from a car I'd never seen, but the terrain was unmistakable. The downgrade between 211 and 212, the same curve, the same concrete wall. The camera jostled as the car slowed. A woman's voice whispered, "It's not a tunnel, it's a..." Then the feed froze on a frame of her eyes, widening in the mirror, headlights whitening the concrete. For half a second, the wall looked translucent, like thick ice, and behind it, something vast moved. The image pixelated, and the recording ended. That night I drove out there alone. No call sign, no backup, no record. The moon was thin, the road black and glassy. At mile 212, the new patch of concrete looked smooth and featureless, the repair clean, the seams sealed with fresh resin. I parked on the shoulder and turned off the engine. The air was colder than it should have been. When I breathed, the frost hung too long in front of me before fading. I stood at the wall and waited. After 10 minutes, I heard the first sound, faint, rhythmic, like knuckles rapping from deep inside the concrete. 3 slow, 2 fast. Then a pause. The radio on my belt hissed, even though it wasn't powered. My own voice came through, distorted and slow. 15 minutes. The panel ahead of me began to frost over, a spreading bloom of white that traced the outline of a door, same shape as before. Within that frost, something shifted. I leaned closer. Through the ice, I saw movement. A silhouette, a person pressing their palms outward. Then another figure behind them, taller, broader, haloed by faint red light. The smaller shape mouthed words I couldn't hear. The frost over her hands melted from the heat of her skin. I could make out her face. It was me, not exactly, younger maybe, thinner, hair shorter, but undeniably me. She looked terrified. The larger shape behind her raised its hand, rested it gently on her head. Her body went still, her eyes closed. Then she folded, collapsing backward into the dark. The frost on the wall cracked down the center. A hairline seam appeared. I told myself I wouldn't touch it, but my gloved hand was already on the surface before I could stop it. The cold bit through the leather instantly. Something pressed back from the other side. A hand, palm to palm with mine. The texture wasn't like skin. It was smoother, almost glassy, with a faint vibration, like machinery buried deep underground. A voice spoke through the barrier. It sounded like me. It only hurts the first time. The crack widened. A soft white light poured through, but it wasn't light in any sense I know. It had no source, no warmth, just a presence that erased shadow. Inside that light were countless shapes suspended like ash, fragments of metal, broken glass, bits of fabric, faces half-formed and drifting. A woman's voice came from all around. He's through. Then the wall breathed. It exhaled once, and the frost burst outward, covering the asphalt, the guardrail, the windshield of my truck. The light flickered out. The seam vanished. When I looked down, the glove on my hand was frozen solid. Underneath, my palm burned. A perfect white handprint marked the skin, colder than ice, edges still steaming. That was 3 months ago. The department thinks I'm on extended medical leave. My radio still clicks on by itself at 0014 every night. Sometimes it's just static. Sometimes I hear pages turning. Sometimes I hear the zipper. And once, just once, I heard a little girl's voice whisper, "You got it open." Last night, the frost returned to the inside of my bedroom window. At first it was random, branching crystals. Then it started to take shape. 5 lines, a palm, small fingers. And next to it, another, larger one, pressed from the inside. The temperature in the house dropped to 41 degrees. I could smell copper and paper and something faintly sweet. Then a voice that wasn't mine said softly, right behind my ear, "Step 7. If anyone reads this, if they send you to mile marker 212 for any reason, don't stop, don't slow down. And if you see the triangles, no, you didn't. Just keep driving, because whatever's behind that wall isn't trying to get out. It's trying to trade places."